Hi everyone, I'm bringing you something slightly different today. Instead of doing the usual game commentary, I'm going to do a general deck building guide on Gagarin, sorry, I keep mispronouncing it. Gagarin Deep Space, the ID. Behind me, you see in the background is a game of myself against one of my great friends. It's Gagarin versus Noise, and as you might expect from the ID matchup, I get crushed really badly because Noise is such a good counter to Gagarin. But more on that later. So I'll be going through some deck building principles with Gagarin, and hopefully that will give you a clearer idea and maybe even motivate you to get a Gagarin deck built up. So this deck that I'm running here is not a very good deck. It's basically an experiment to see whether Gagarin can exploit its ID using horizontal deck building with lots of turtle bags, public support, daily listener show, pet campaigns, etc. It didn't work out very well this game, needless to say. As you will see, my horizontal assets did not get to live very long because against Noise can simply use Imp to get rid of them at very little cost. And I also throw in some flatline pieces with Scorched Earth and Punitive Counter-Strike with the 3-point Agenda Suite plus Government Takeover. Again, that didn't work out very well because my opponent got a good economic foothold between Cash, Daily Cast, and Aesop's Pawn Shop. But first, let's talk about Gagarin itself. The ID ability states when as an extra cost to access cards in remote servers, the runner must pay 1 credit. So this immediately lends itself to playing horizontally. You spam pet campaigns, public supports, Jackson Howards, what have you. Your opponent cannot afford to check them all, and yes, it is very difficult for them to deny your horizontal assets. So that sounds like a very good plan, except that now in this current climate it doesn't work very well. Against Shapers, they usually have Astrolabe, so they will be gaining speed while you're gaining speed with your pet campaigns and daily business shows. Against Criminals, this is probably the worst idea because they have bank jobs and security testings that make so much money. Probably outracing you in terms of the credit lead, even if you have 2 or 3 pet campaigns going. This means that if you cannot establish the credit lead versus Criminals, you're probably not going to flatline them via Sea Scorched or Punitive. And against Anarchs, as you see right here, the Imp is just completely oppressive, forcing me to purge virus counters because there was an Imp with 3 counters on it. That just isn't acceptable. So yes, building horizontally is probably a pretty bad idea in the current climate. Turtleback's NEH does decently well. That is the exception because firstly, the runner is forced to check every single remote, unlike in Wayland, because there's this agenda called AstroScript Pilot Program in NBN, and I heard it's pretty good. Another important reason is that NBN is just way more suited to it because Near Earth Hub allows you to draw more cards, drawing into more assets for you to spam out. There's no equivalent Wayland. Your cards come very slowly, and as you see, I'm setting up my board state way slower than my opponent is. I haven't even got any money up on the board. We're roughly on even credit levels, but if I can't get any credits, I can't defend my central servers, let alone try to score the cleaners in my hand. So that's that. So then you ask, if you don't play horizontally, is there any other way to play Gagarin? There actually is. You play vertically. It sounds very counterintuitive, but the thing is, Gagarin's ability works on multiple upgrades and assets, multiple upgrades and assets in the same server. So basically, a server with say Ash and an agenda will cost the opponent 2 more credits to access on a single run. This has another ramification. This means that Valentia, which is relatively common in the meta nowadays, does not completely negate your ID ability, and that's pretty important. These 2 IDs were both released at the same time in Order and Chaos, and it's a pretty problematic issue if you're playing Gagarin and going up against a Valentia, because basically your ID ability is blank and your opponent has the blackmail threat, so you're losing out big time. But if you play vertically, the bad part problem is kind of mitigated, because if you have 3 items in the server, that bad publicity can only go to accessing one of them. The opponent still has to pay more credits to access the other cards. So playing vertically is actually probably a stronger proposition in Gagarin. So that begs the question, can Wayland play vertically? There are not that many good Wayland upgrades out there. In fact, the big reason why Wayland is not competitive right now is because it cannot score agendas like Jinteki and HB can. In the Glacier decks, that is. They have no Ash, no Caprice. The closest thing they have to a defensive upgrade in Wayland is Off the Grid and the Twins, both of which are expensive, horribly expensive, too expensive for Gagarin, which isn't a money ID, unlike the typical building a battle world Titan, which has agenda counters and can be used with Mark Yale, or most commonly, obviously, Blue Sun with Oversight AI. Gagarin does not have any innate money generators, so that is a big problem. That is the first thing that you need to settle. And I think Pirate Campaign is kind of a trap here. As I mentioned previously, you don't really want to protect Pirate Campaigns, so you play them out naked. And while it is expensive at 5 to trash, most of the time your opponent will simply exploit you, whether they are criminals, Anarch, or Shaper. So I really do think Pirate Campaign is a trap. It pays off rather slowly, costs a lot to res, and can be destroyed in so many ways or abused. I would instead go for other sources of economy. In Wayland, there are actually quite a few. The Root and Expo Grid are two very important cards that work best in a vertical setting. The Root needs to be protected, and you will strive to do that, while Expo Grid can go beneath the Root and provide you 1 credit a turn. It has the same payout as Pirate Campaign, but without the need to create an extra remote server. And to top it all off, the Root also synergizes with Breaker Bay Grid, which also synergizes with Gagarin, because a server containing both the Root, Breaker Bay Grid, those two will cost 2 extra credits to trash, on top of the 6 credits that it already costs. That's pretty expensive. Of course, you can't put Expo Grid and Breaker Bay Grid in the same server. That is an unfortunate side effect. But you can always have a side server for scoring agendas, and more importantly, chucking your public supports. Now, public support is a very strong card. If you have played against with Convenience Shop, which is Butcher Shop, with news teams and quantum predictive models, you know that the ability to manipulate agenda points is so important. The ability to just add 1 point to your score area without needing to score an agenda, that's pretty huge. And you can do that very well. You don't have to leave public support naked. You can put it with Expo Grid under a piece of ice, and that is incredibly taxing for the runner. Gagarin's all about the tax, as you may or may not have figured by now. That's completely due to the ID ability. So you want to tax the runner as much as possible. And since the runner is going to be on so few credits, if they do decide to challenge your remotes, Ash will be the best choice of upgrade, because when the runner's poor, you can easily defend the Ash trace and make it very hard for them to trash the Ash. That said, Gagarin, the main reason why Gagarin is so weak, or rather why it doesn't see too much play right now, is because it is very weak to central assaults, which comes as no surprise. Your ID ability defends remotes very well, but it's completely useless when it comes to defending centrals, and a lot of runners can abuse that, be it account siphons, Maker's Eye runs, medium digs, etc. So you do need some sort of defense for that. Priority on ice should always go on the centrals. Usually remotes can do with just 1 piece of ice. Centrals, however, would mostly require at least 2, and you want to make it such that they cannot lock your R&D every single turn. That's not very easy, but it should still be doable with a combination of Chrysium Grid, which is Infection, and Ash. Again, Ash works on R&D as well, and can be a huge deterrent. So when all that is said and done, you actually have a pretty good setup. Because with public support, you only need score 3 2-pointers, or 2 3-pointers, and that brings us to the next topic, the agenda suite. Do you want run lots of 3-pointers or lots of 2-pointers? In this deck, as you see in this game, I run all the 3-pointers and a 6-pointer in Government Takeover, which is in my heat right now. It's not a very good setup. Wayland has a very, very hard time scoring out. I would much prefer the 2-point agenda suite. Play Atlases and Oaktown. You do have to score more of them, but they are actually useful. Atlas can allow you to tutor if you do manage to find a scoring window to over advance it, and Oaktown still gives you money even if you fail to defend it. It's pretty good. So I would suggest a 2-pointer agenda suite, rounded off with Global Food Initiative to reduce your agenda density. So the runner still needs to steal 4 agendas, but you potentially only need to score 3, be it with the Global Food or with public support. And that's pretty good. And finally, to round off the money, there's always this question that I ask myself when I build a Gagarin deck. Do you play paywall implementation? It's pretty obvious in a horizontal deck that you run paywall implementation. This being a horizontal deck that you see right here, of course I do run paywall. It is out right now, as you see in the current on the top left, but it isn't doing that much. It is completely negating the lamprey that my opponent has, and that's about it. It's a pretty niche interaction, not too bad. It means that he cannot just run my HQ again and again. But the real reason for including paywall is not as a good solid source of income. It's more as a deterrent. In this game, as you see, my opponent is deterred from whacking to HQ with lampreys. Against criminals, they are deterred from making security testing runs. They probably will still do it, but they'll give you money while you're at it. So paywall is more of a counter for aggressive runners, such as criminals and anyone that runs lamprey, like credit denial Reina, or in this case noise. Paywall doesn't do that much against shapers, especially against multi-access cards like Maker's Eye and R&D Eye, because they can easily just hit R&D one time, trigger paywall once, steal an agenda, and fade paywall away. So paywall is more of a meta call, I would say. It is an econ card that is somewhat unreliable, or should I say inconsistent. Really depends on the matchup. If you want a more solid econ card, you have to play the standard hedge fund. The root is a pretty solid econ card if you can defend it. And that's about all that Wayland has, unfortunately. Breaker Bay Grid helps alleviate the cost of rezzing a root. And finally, the other option is always restructure, which is not ideal considering that you need to get up to 10 credits, and Gagarin isn't very good at doing that. But that's probably my choice of deck. So far, what I've described so far seems like a completely different deck from the one that I'm running here, and indeed it is. You drop the kill combo, you drop kill package, and you go for more solid ice that doesn't just insta-die to Parasite. This deck that you see right here runs lots of low strength ice such as Spiderweb, Tour Guide, all of which really gets crushed by Parasite very easily. Whereas I'm envisioning a deck with stronger ice, a good mix of both binary, cheap, early to res ice, and late game ice such as Toll Booth. You'll be spending influence on Toll Booth because it really is the best ice for Gagarin. Considering that you are already sapping away at your opponent's credits, having to fork out an extra 3 credits to run through that server once is very painful. And Toll Booth makes the perfect defense for centrals. You can't really ask for any better ice than that on centrals, because Wayland specializes in barriers, and most of them just get completely knocked down by either Parasite or Green Cerberus. Here's Quicksand, as you see me res right here. Another ice that just insta-dies the Parasite. And that's a big problem. My opponent gets a clone chip out and parasites it instantly. This is not what you want. You want solid ice like Toll Booth and Firewall, and that is a deck that I'm envisioning. One where the centrals can be adequately defended by thick ice. That's pretty expensive to res, but it gets cheaper when you use the root to res it, and you simply churn out more money and more points behind your double remotes. That deck that I'm envisioning would need 2 remotes, one for money and one for agendas, either public support or an actual agenda. So yeah, that is my deck idea, and I do intend to showcase it sometime in the future. We'll see how successful it is. It probably still isn't as good as the tier 1.5, tier 2 Blue Sun decks, because Blue Sun is just gives so much raw power. The big problem with Gagarin is that the main reason why it gets so problematic to play is when you hit these horrible matchups like Gagarin versus Noise or Gagarin versus Valencia, and you completely fold because you're so reliant on setting up a remote that Valencia can just blackmail in. Or, in this case, you're so reliant on letting your horizontal assets tick down that by the time they are doing work for you, by the time you get off the ground, you realize that there are only 7 cards left in R&D for you. And Archives is full of agendas that the opponent can win simply by playing a Hades Shard right now. So that's the problem against Anarchs. Gagarin is by nature a very slow deck, because when you play cards like Peg, Campaign, and Public Support, you are in it for the long haul, and that's not good for you. My opponent top decks the winning agenda here with a 5 deep medium deck run. Not too much of a surprise, to be honest. And back to what I was talking about, the deck that I've been envisioning. This is what it looks like. Not the one that I just played. That is a terrible deck. This is much better. 2-pointers are much easier to score. Most of the time, you can just score Atlas without telegraphing it to your opponent. You don't have too many assets so that you don't have to play horizontally, which leaves you vulnerable to bank job and the likes of it. The Root and the Breakaway Grid is very powerful, a combination, similar to how Adonis and Eve campaign are when paired with Breakaway in HB. Breakaway, there is no Expo Grid in this deck. Yeah, I replaced Expo Grid with Breakaway Grid. You could make a case for mixing both, but remember they can only have one on each server. Ash is definitely the upgrade of choice to protect whatever remotes you have, or R&D, and also synergizes with Breakaway Grid. A singleton Cyberdex Virus Suite because you're just so weak against viruses, you can't afford to spend time purging virus counters. Standard money here, the restructures could be paywall implementations if there are lots of anarchs or criminals running rampant. Ice Suite is here. There's not much you can do with Wayland Ice, unfortunately. With only 4 influence to spare and all that having to go to Toll Booth, you don't really have much of a choice. I'm going with Firewall, Ice Wall, and Builder as the main combination. They can work individually. Individually, Builder doesn't do anything, but once you get at least one Firewall or Ice Wall, you can stack it up on R&D or HQ, whichever server the wall is on, and suddenly you have a decent server. One which gear checks twice, and more importantly, is pretty taxing at 4 strength and 1 or 5 strength. Pretty decent. So, this is what I envision to be a semi-decent deck. Again, I'll play this deck in the future sometime. If you're interested in playtesting this my deck out with one of your own, do hit me on Twitter. Hit me up on Twitter and we'll arrange something. In the meantime, thanks for watching Happy Net Running. Hopefully you've gained some insight as to how to play and build Gagarin Deep Space. Maybe you can even have some ideas of your own, share them with me. That would be great. Thanks for watching Happy Net Running. Goodbye.